Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Carfree. Get Around Cabo Carfree is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today, we are doing one of our Road Rules 360 episodes. We are here today on Gubby Gubby Country, and as usual, John Burrill, very esteemed road rules subject matter expert from the TMR, retired 6 years ago. You did that for 25 years?
25 years in the Department of Transport.
Road rules?
20 of those were in the road rules area. I've kept my hand in a little bit, just keep an eye on what's going on even nowadays. So.
When you've been removed from it for a little while, you just do lose some of that.
You do.
And things change,
Yep.
and so much of legislation changes on such a regular basis.
All the time.
And there's a big thing about scooters, bicycles, e-bikes. All this is new legislation since you left, roughly. Yeah, so...
Oh, there are some amendments, quite a lot of amendments in that area of wheeled recreational devices and scooters and personal mobility devices, and there's been a lot of changes there.
Right.
It's all become very complicated.
Yeah, it requires a bit more thought, and there is nuance. It's the human condition.
Yeah.
You say it's always like this or it's never like that, and then you're up against the human condition where it's it's a bit more nuanced than that. Today we're doing something slightly different to what we usually do. We're actually responding to a query that we received. If you have a question, by all means submit your question to us through the website, and you'll get the website at the outro. Anything that we say is to our best knowledge. You have a good handle on it. I don't know anything, as usual. Everything that we do here is just to give a bit of a heads up and guidance. Don't come back to us and tell us that we said this, so therefore don't do that, because, that's just rubbish. You have been warned. We are not here to give advice, recommendations. We're just giving a bit of a heads up on our take on things. So, and with that legal caveat in place. And something else. Yesterday we had our Streets and People podcast launch, the official one. We had the police minister there, which is very nice. And we had Nick was there.
Yes.
Who has submitted the question. So he's a local, somebody who I know previously. He said, what happens in this? And there was a particular situation that arose. Now, you've spoken with Nick on the phone previously, and you also followed up with him yesterday.
Yes.
So what was his initial query that he came in with?
Well, the initial query was he was riding along sort of fairly major road behind an edge line. So he was actually on the shoulder of the road. He was intending to drive past an intersection, which was basically a T intersection on the left, and a car overtook him and turned left into that street, basically cutting him off. And apparently what happened then, the car turned around and got very cross and angry with him and had a bit of a fight.
Punched him in the face?
Punched him in the face, that's right.
Outrageous.
And he went to the police. He was very appreciative of the way the police dealt with it. They were very onto his case, and from what I understand, they contacted this driver and gave him a warning. I don't think he got a fine or anything, but he certainly got a serious warning from the police in that respect. The initial issue was, or the question from Nick was really to do with the road rules as to who gives way in that situation, because obviously the guy was really cross because he was under the impression that Nick on his bicycle was required to give way.
He submitted his question to us.
He submitted his question.
And then for me to ask you, and then you said, yes, because it's actually a bit more nuanced about what the answer is. So we wrote off a letter to the minister. You prepared a paragraph, and then I stuck it on our letterhead. The question that we said is, we are seeking clarity regarding section 67 paragraph 4 of the Queensland Road Rules, which provides that a driver turning at an intersection must give way to the rider of a bicycle who is crossing the road the driver is turning into. This rule is clear for a rider who is crossing from one path to another across the road. The best way to illustrate our question is to imagine an intersection where the cyclist is crossing the terminating road and a car is turning left from the continuing road into the terminating road. So what the question was that John included in the letter was, does section 67 paragraph 4 still apply when the cyclist is moving from one shoulder of the road on the continuing road to another shoulder of the road across the intersection? Our question hinges on whether the rider is considered to be crossing the terminating road or not. For the purposes of these rules, where does the terminating road end? Basically, it all hinges on a technicality. That was where our main issue was. What this basically is saying is, as you said, it's a T intersection. So one of those is a council street, it's quite a small street, and the other one is a major arterial road, which is a state street, it's a TMR street. Nick was cycling in the road shoulder, in the road-related area, and so that is not the official road part of the street, I guess. The driver was coming up behind and he's like, I'm going to turn left, and giving a bit of a signal to that. Somehow he assumed that his vehicle had priority over a small bicycle, partly because Nick was riding on the road shoulder. So does somebody in the road shoulder have priority over somebody who is on the main part of the road? Yeah. And there is a common misconception that people who are the main proper people who are allowed to be on the road are people in cars, and that is also incorrect. And it is also incorrect to punch somebody on the nose. That is a criminal offence, and that is violence.
I think they could have thrown the book at him if they wanted to, and I think there was an option. Nick was telling me to press charges and to go to court for an assault offence, but he decided no. He was happy with the way the police had dealt with it and given this guy a warning, and hopefully that gentleman has changed his ways and maybe won't be so quick to use violence as the way to sort of prove his point.
Yeah, so we got a reply back from Transport and Main Roads, and then even then we said, yes, but we have a technical question on this. Yeah. We actually need to investigate further. So these things, it's people who are behind all these road rules and the application of what happens then. It feels like it's a big machine that is going to crunch down, and it may or may not be. You then spoke with somebody at the Transport and Main Roads in the road rules area for clarity.
Yes, happy to say that it was a good conversation. Transport and Main Roads, their official policy confirmed our initial thoughts in that essentially the driver turning left in that situation is required to give way to a cyclist that's travelling along the road beside them and to the left of them. And the same as an oncoming vehicle turning right is also required to give way to the cyclist travelling along the road. It was very interesting that TMR have recently brought out a video which very accurately depicts what we're talking about here. It shows from the driver's perspective and how he's basically just starts to overtake the bicycle and then turns left, effectively cutting the cyclist off. And there's a big red cross comes over the video saying this is not what to do. The next part of the video clip is the car driver just eases up. The cyclist continues, passes the intersection, and the driver turns left behind the cyclist, avoiding any conflict, with a big green tick over the top of it. It's a great video. It's perfect timing for this podcast, really, because they tie in with each other.
What we'll do is we can put a link to it on the show notes, both on the website and on the different platforms. So what we have discovered in our little journey of road rules that we've been going through for the last several episodes is really how I'm not surprised the driver thought this is my road and you have to give way to me. Because, as we said, the road rules are basically designed for someone who's in a car and everybody else. It's sort of retrofitted rather badly or poorly to any other road user. And we call them vulnerable road users, but we don't talk about the dangerous road user, which is the car. They are the most dangerous because they are...
Good way of putting it.
Because they are the ones who are everywhere. I think what Nick's question is specifically related to is this cultural idea that the road is there for car drivers only. And that is really the problem here, that the basic foundation, that particular interaction is a marker of a problem that is seen to be a cultural norm that drivers have, that they are the road users. And recently I was in a car with two people one of them was giving me a lift, and there was some people riding bikes on the road just up ahead, and it was a Saturday morning, it was a little suburban street. Oh, they're not allowed to ride on the road. and they shouldn't be doing this. And I said, well,
Right.
actually they are allowed to do that, and I can tell you because I know the road rules because I've been doing them with John and on this podcast. And she was going, yeah, but they're not at the speed limit and they're not allowed to do this. They have to give away, they have to be on the road shoulder. And this is a really common
Absolute
misconception.
nonsense, yeah.
But
the many misconceptions.
yeah, but it's because you look at the street and you go, well, 50 kilometres an hour, that is only safe for people inside cars. That is not a speed that is safe for anybody outside cars, because there's something just different in the way that you perceive the world. If you listen to the episode with Rod King, we talk a lot about the difference between 30 kilometres an hour and 50 kilometres an hour. And at 50 kilometres an hour, it is a road space. At 30 kilometres an hour, it is more shared space. And it's these sorts of things, the road markings, the lack of pedestrian crossings, the lack of even signalised crossings for pedestrians. All these are markers. The funding allocation is for the commuter. About 80-90% of funding allocation for transport in this state by the TMR is for the commuter.
It's interesting.
Yeah, because it's mostly on those big roads.
Yes.
And on heavy rail. And they are commuter journeys.
Yeah.
They aren't the little journeys around here for the buses, the footpaths, bicycle paths.
Yes.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's very gendered. This is what I learnt. So, before we close out on Nick's question, anything else to add about that?
Well, I think just on the whole misconception issues, I think one of the main misconceptions that I always like to try and push back against is this thing: they don't pay their way on the road. They don't pay registration like I do driving my big car down the road. Well, it's a nonsense. Although registration fees do go towards road safety, it's just a small amount in the big picture of things. Every ratepayer, everybody who pays their taxes, all of that money goes into the consolidated revenue. That is what provides for all of our road users. And the whole concept of putting a registration fee on a bicycle is complete and utter rubbish. It would cost way more to collect that fee than it would be worth doing. It just wouldn't be. For every dollar you get, it would cost $20 to actually glean that dollar.
I was recently somewhere and, I was talking about Get Around, and I was actually supporting her husband's business. I won't go into what that is, and encouraging people to go to his business. But she was, I hope they don't take away money from cars and onto bicycles because, they keep, and I'm going, what is my standard line? It sounds like what you think is that your registration and your various fees that you pay actually cover the cost of the car. That's actually not the case. It's a very, very small amount, because not only is it the road cost and the road building and all that sort of stuff, but it's also the externalized costs of the car, which are collisions. That at a minimum is $30 billion a year. Yep. Then you've got the public health costs of all the respiratory diseases and fuel emissions, diseases that come from the fuel emissions. And then you have all the diseases that come from non-fuel emissions. And non-fuel emissions are things like tyre dust, brake pads, brake fluid, oil from the engine, oil vapor off the road, the dust that goes there. So there's a whole lot of huge costs that come from cars that are all externalized. Yes. So things like cancer, for instance, many of those, it's to do with the emissions particles in fuel emissions. Fully carcinogenic. It's tyre dust is also very nasty stuff. There's no way that those costs are anywhere near included in the cost of running a car. Cars are just really throwing good money after bad. There's no two ways about that. And that
Unless
is
it's an electric vehicle.
No, but
we won't go there.
Yeah, but you've still got tyre dust. So people say this. You've still got tyre dust. You've still got brake fluid. You've still got the speed. You've still got the collisions. You've still got the obesity issues. And people think, electric cars are going to solve that problem, but they just ain't the truth.
They solve some problems, but not all.
They solve some of the petrol issues, and that's kind of it. Yeah. And they don't solve the problem of social isolation and all sorts of other things. So, no, John, your e-car is not going to solve the answer. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it.
That's it?
That's covered that topic.
All right. We'll call it a day for this episode.
Yep.
If you have a question, you just let us know. Absolutely. We are absolutely busting a gut to have your question.
Yes.
Submit now.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye now.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People presented by Get Around Cabo Carfree. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Carfree, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.